Hello. There's something I need to do to get something off of my mind for the sake of those who hear. To those who have ears, let them hear the truth. So, God and his plan. You see, it says in Isaiah when it talks about Cyrus that God created calamity, but the word for calamity in the Bible is Ra. That word in Isaiah chapter 45 is Ra. I created Ra. Let me explain Ra to you. Remember the tree in the middle of the garden? The tree of the knowledge of good and Ra, good and evil. So when it says calamity, the word is Ra. Ra means evil. God said, I created the darkness, I created the light, I created evil. I created Ra. He said he created Ra. It says so in the Bible. Although different versions will say calamity, but when you get to the Hebrew word Ra, it is the same word used for the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God said, I created Ra. Now you have to ask the question, how could God create such a thing? And my question to you is, God created all things. God is so big that he created all good things, but he didn't create the bad things. So he has no control over the bad things. Well, if he has no control over the bad things, then he ain't God. If he doesn't have any control because he didn't create it, he's not God. Oh, well, God's somewhat big. No, God is all big, all powerful. He created all things for his reasons. And what reason would he have for creating it? Because of this. Because when he created all things, he couldn't just create just everything, lollipops and sweet things, because too many sweet things aren't good for you. He had to create everything. If you're an infinite mind and you create one thing but you are blind to the opposite, then you're not God. The question is why, and how does God deal with it? Let me tell you what it's all about. Pride. It's about pride. Okay? When you look at the garden and you look at this fallen angel, Satan, that was created, God created Satan for a purpose and a reason. And what happened in the garden was a purpose and a reason. For when they ate of that fruit of good and Ra, good and evil, they became knowledgeable. They ate the tree of the knowledge of that. And so that knowledge made them exalt themselves just as Satan did. You see, self-righteousness and pride is evil because it leads to exalting yourself above God, you being in control. And this is what it's all about. God created Adam and Eve and put them in the garden and knew that they would eat of that fruit, not because it was a mistake, but because God was condemning pride. Remember that God created things good, but there was something that wasn't good. And that was exaltation in the legalness of the law to make you above God in your pride. This is where all the lordship, salvation, and everybody making themselves self-righteous, the pride of self-righteousness, exalting yourself to God. For Satan was the prosecuting attorney, the one that tests. Remember, Job was tested. Why would God test Job? Remember my servant Job? Have you considered my servant Job? Look it up. First chapter. Job was a righteous man, and Satan came before the courts of God. And God himself elicited Satan and said, have you considered my servant Job? Why did God have Job tested? Because this whole world is a testing ground. And there is no one righteous, no, not one. So what was his plan? His plan was to destroy pride through the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, through the other tree, the tree of life. which had to do with grace, because you can't exalt yourself. You must let God make you righteous. Because without you letting God be righteous or give you righteousness, your own righteousness turns to evil. Why was that important? And why did God let this happen or make this happen where he destroyed people? All the people in the world were destroyed in a flood. Why? Why did he do that? Why? Does that seem wrong to people? Yes, it does. It seems wrong in the mind of man, but you're not God, are you? You're not the mind of God. And so the purpose of salvation through Christ and God bringing children to himself through the one that was cut off, Christ, was so that the pride of your own self-righteousness doesn't poison the good fruit that God is bringing about. So you talk about, well, God wasn't willing that this happened, and God wasn't willing that happened. Well, you know what? I'm not willing that hard things happen in my life. I know that there's things that I don't want to do, but I'm doing because I do want to do them for my purpose. Doesn't mean I take pleasure in it, but it does mean that this had to happen. And I had to will for it to happen, even though I'd like to see all people saved and the whole world happy and all this. And everybody's high-fiving one another, except for those who don't believe. All of that malarkey isn't true. God died for specific people that he chose so that pride could not destroy or poison his children. And you're like, well, I can give him all praise, even though, he died for everybody and I accepted him. Yeah, but that's not the way God wanted it. No, you can't, by your own free will, exalt yourself or I'm not exalting myself. Actually, yes, you are. You're exalting yourself when you trust in yourself and say, well, I'm not trusting in myself. By my own free will. Then God's not in control. You have to understand that God is in control. You're not. And when you understand that you're blessed, you're like, well, what about all of this? And well, God's unrighteous. And well, Paul in Romans 9 says, is there unrighteousness with God? Oh, it was about nations. Let me tell you something, malarkey. It wasn't about nations. It was about the nation, the one nation, the nation of the believers, the nation of the chosen. Why were you chosen? Because God chose you. Well, does that make God unrighteous? No. You know why? Because God is God. He's not a man. He's the creator of all things and the owner of all things. And he wanted to adopt children for himself in such a way that there's nobody that can say that they chose anything, that all glory go to him. Now, I don't care if you argue with me. I'm just going to tell you the truth. The righteousness that comes from faith in Jesus Christ is a righteousness that you cannot not only not boast in, but you must give glory to God because you have no ability to do anything else. You must accept it. Oh, yes, you can preach the gospel and hopefully they'll come. But God does what God does because God is God and you're not. God is a righteous God, that's true. But God had a plan to save people the way he saved them for his reasons and his purposes and not for man's purposes and man's will. Because the will of man cannot thwart the will of God.